And it looks like we are live with Essa Hansen. Essa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm a sci-fi and fantasy author with Orbit Books. My debut trilogy is almost complete. Nophek Gloss and Essa Ghost. Um, I'm also a sound designer for film, working with Skywalker Sound on sci-fi and fantasy feature films.
In addition to being a swordsman, falconer, a ninja, and having worked on, I don't know, 3 or 4 Marvel movies that you can name off the top of your head, we need to start with these 3 professions. I'm just curious, how does each one? No, I want to go into that more later. What I actually want to start with is like our job is to tell people, why they should read your book. So I actually want to start with that. If you met somebody who had not come across Nophek Gloss, Zero Ghost before, and you had a reason that they should pick it up and try it for the first time, what would you say to them?
Yeah, if they were already a fan of these genres, then I would say pick it up if you're looking for something that's different than what's kind of in the market right now. Most of my readers comment on how different and unique it is, and weird and imaginary. So I think if you're looking for something a little different and something that's immersive and has really sensory immersion to it, try out my series.
I think that's perfect. So now let's get into ninja. We'll come back around to the book in a second. Swordsman, ninja, falconer, and these are all real things, right? I mean,
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not alone in gravitating to all like the fantasy hobbies, like swordsmanship, falconry, archery, like crafting, all that.
it's like a live role
Horseback
playing,
riding.
except for real.
Yeah, yeah.
So, falconer, you've been doing a long time, right?
I took a break the past several years because I got too busy with work, and it's really time intensive sport, um, especially once book stuff and work stuff doubled up. I ran out of time and moved somewhere with less of a yard, so you need space. There's like a lot of requirements. Um, and since your partner is a living animal, you can't just like set it aside for any amount of time. It's like constant daily care and
Right.
training. So it's been a while, but I did that for many years. Made it work.
Oh, that's fantastic. How big of a yard do you need in order to be a falconer?
Well, some falconers get away with keeping their raptors inside if you have a lot of space or an extra room or something like that. But legally, you need like I think it's 6 by 6 by 6, like a structure called a muse, specifically to house the bird outside.
Use.
So I've always had room to build a muse and have that there.
MEWS?
Yes.
Oh, wow. I can't believe I got it right.
Yeah.
So, which takes us to sword play. Did that start out as like a theater thing, or was it actual practice? Was it I started with fencing and then I moved over? What did that look like?
So specifically, I've trained in Japanese swordsmanship, and I happened to find a dojo and a trainer that did sort of all 3 aspects, which is kind of hard to find. So we did kendo, which is what a lot of people are familiar with, I think, when they think of Japanese swordsmanship. So that's the armor, and you're actually sparring. And then iaido, which is like solo movements and patterns, and focuses on drawing and cutting. We also do like actual cutting on targets, and kenjutsu, which is like miscellaneous other sort of sword arts related to them, and also hand in hand and other weapons and things like that. So it was a really well-rounded sort of look at Japanese swordsmanship in general.
And one of them sounds kind of like dance, where
Yeah,
solo.
it's very choreographed, and there's sort of and this was really easy for me. You're sort of imagining the opponents, so there's like a scenario that's going on for each pattern. You're like who you're cutting, yeah, and who's attacking you and how you're moving. But no one is playing those parts unless you're choosing to trained that way. So it's sort of all in your head how you're reacting to this sort of imaginary scenario, which is really easy for me with like a great imagination.
And did that start as a form of exercise, a form of discipline, a form of wish fulfillment? What was the initial draw?
I think all of the above. Like,
Wow.
yeah, it's physical, it's technical. There's an art to it. There's a history to it. There's like, yeah, all of the aspects of it were really appealing to me.
And then last, of course, we have to go to Ninja because this is out there. Bo claims it's true.
Well, it's funny because I have friends, coworkers that gave me the nickname Ninja like years ago. So I'm like, how did he know?
Are you just mega stealthy? Or is it the way you move? Or is it the fact that you've got the katana?
I don't know. Probably again, maybe all of the above.
So your journey from to how you became a writer is really interesting to me. So how did you start out? Who were you when you were 10, 13 years old? Because you're incredibly intelligent. And were you that way as a kid? Were you like top of the class, this is easy, give me the next one? Or did you grow into that gradually? Were you a nerd from the go? Were you an adventure girl? What did that look like?
Yeah. So, like that time period, I was living in very rural Canada. So, we
Okay.
didn't have a lot of resources. I was homeschooled. So, I wasn't like, didn't have peers. I was really kind of isolated. But that, I think that just accentuated all of the traits that you're talking about. Like it made me kind of go internal, and I was reading a lot of science nonfiction and fantasy fiction, and I was out in nature all the time, just like observing in the sensory world, um, and these hobbies at the same time. Um, so yeah, I was always intellectual and drawn towards philosophy and science and storytelling and music and like all these different interests that were hard to kind of bring together. But in storytelling and fiction especially, it's like the perfect playground for that to sort of congeal into something.
And is this you at 10 you're doing this? 13 you're doing this? 17 surely by then.
Yeah, I'd say between like 11 and 20-ish. But like my actual author origin story is really boring and common where like, I've been writing since I was super little and like I've always been a reader and I've always been like immersed in storytelling in whatever form.
So let's talk about those formative stories for you. When you were coming up, what were the things that spoke to you loudest or rang truest?
I always struggle with this question because like I hear other authors and readers will have like this one thing, like this one series that stood out, or these few that will like spark something or really influential or hit them at like just the right time. But I don't think that I had like that one or those few or that like big thing
Right.
that like
The-
started me going or like, yeah, that turned some switch. Um, I think it was a lot of just constant gradual immersion. And I can't even now name some of the books and series because I was reading so much that I'd have to I'd have to look at
one of the ones that I wanted to ask about was the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer. You have a relationship with that book. Is that true?
I do, but it's super recent. I hadn't found him like
We're just going to go
until
ahead and skip from then to now, but I'm
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
you're talking about you didn't have one seminal author, but Vandermeer rings well for you. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So a friend of mine recommended this like 4 or 5 years ago or something, and she texts me and she's like, "You have to read this. The main character is you." And she's reading through. I'm like, "All right, well, that's an endorsement if I ever heard one."
That book's for me.
um, yeah, that's books for me. Um, and yeah, there's been a couple times in like my reading journey where I'm just not finding, and maybe this is relatable to other people. I'm just not finding the sort of thing that craving to read, and I can't even articulate what it is that I'm looking for until you find it, right?
It's like the
And
perfect
then,
love. You just boom and you know.
yeah, and for whatever reason you find it and you're like, this is exactly what I was looking for. I wouldn't have known how to find it, but it falls in love. So the Southern Reach series was sort of that. It was like the beautiful, quiet pace of it, the sort of creepy, eerie mystery, the weirdness, the surreal aspect, and how it deals with identity and perception, and like everything about that series was hitting at that right time in a way that I needed.
Well, talking about kind of your early influences, you were kind of all over the place because it wasn't just storytelling, right? You were deep into science. You had several different career paths picked out that were completely disparate. Uh, how did sound design choose you, or did you choose sound design?
I think it chose me. Like when I always struggled to figure out like what thing it was that brought that to my attention, because I was more into music, like composing a little bit and trying to fit music to stories and character, and bringing in some of the philosophy side and the psychoacoustics, like science side, and like trying to triangulate all of these things. And I can't remember like the moment where film, and specifically audio storytelling in film and other visual media, came in as like, hey, this this may be the route that has everything that you want and is technical and creative at the same time. Um, but yeah, I found that and it just fit. And one thing that's funny is when I graduated, I wasn't really aiming to work on science fiction and fantasy films, even though that's obviously where my passions are. But I got right into Skywalker, and that's sort of what they're known for. So like fast-tracked right into the genres that are
well, and you kind of found it, said, oh, that's interesting to me. And then you took like this flashbang 6-month degree, right?
Yeah, it was like 4 years of credits crammed into 12-month program. It's really intense.
How did you do that?
Well, it felt perfect because I'm not wasting time. I can sort of hyper focus on this. Like this is what I'm doing for this intense period. And then you're out and hopefully find work like without having to spend 4 years.
Well, Skywalker came and got you, right? I mean, they plucked you right out of school.
Yeah. As I graduated, and then I sort of had like 2 weeks to pack up everything and move down here to the Bay Area and get started.
So kind of what I imagine, and tell me where I'm wrong, is I come up, I explore the world a little bit, I find something that I want to do, I educate myself in that, I get picked up, I land in a quote unquote perfect job, right? Oh, this is great. No job is perfect. Then kind of in that housing where you've got some safety and security and a little bit of fulfillment, is that where it starts to become, well, I've got this whole chest of things that I've written, maybe I should pull them together into a story?
Yeah,
How did that flow go?
So I was always writing just for myself, and I didn't really feel like a lot of authors, they need to see their book on the shelf. Like their dream is to be a published author and like to have a readership and all that. Sure. I never really had that. And I don't know that I can name why. I think like my passion is more in the process of creation and like building the world, building the story, exploring it along with my characters. More than having to share that with other people. So like I was completely fulfilled just in the process of writing and creating. So I would write stories and like revise the same stories over and over and like build big world and all that sort of stuff, all in my own little sandbox, like never thinking that I'd need to, want to share it. And again, I can't really find a catalyst for where I was like, oh, I should pursue publication and like try and do this for real. But I think probably what it was seeing that as a new challenge. Like maybe I should actually dig really into craft and finish one of these novels and polish it and like make it this complete thing that's not just fulfilling for me, because that could be a complete mess and I'll be fine with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the extra challenge of trying to craft something that strikes other people in the same way as it does me when I'm creating it. So it was only pretty recently in like my whole writing journey that I actually decided to pursue being published and that whole route.
That whole route. So
Yeah, those trenches.
and you pursued it, and you had like good response right from the beginning, I think, and got a response right back, and kind of off we go to the races.
It was a little not quite right away. I didn't like. There's so many different stories from querying authors. Like some have written 10 books and it's their 11th that takes off, and some have written one book that's just brilliant and it gets picked up right away. And I was somewhere a little bit in the middle. So I wrote the first book in a epic fantasy trilogy first, and that was like the book of my heart at the time. And queried that first, and that took a little while. There was like technical stuff going on with how I was querying, and I would never do this again, but I wrote Nophek Gloss and the sequel in that trilogy at the same time. I was sort of bouncing between the two. Ooh. I don't know why, and I wouldn't recommend it for myself again. But it worked for my brain then. I think when I was stuck on one, I would switch gears, and since it was a different genre in a totally different world, it helped me keep my momentum going.
Okay. When I'm tired of red, I'll use
yeah. Which is why Nophek Gloss is sort of my second novel, but also maybe the third. Like they're a little neck and neck, those two. And then I started querying Nophek Gloss and was done. So I was querying the two at the same time, looking for a literary agent. Yeah. And that I got responses for that right away. Like as soon as I started querying both for real, because I was on an exclusive submission at first. But as soon as I was like, okay, let's go, then I got a lot of responses, and I got my wonderful agent within like a month. Yeah.
And what was the big difference between writing the first book, right? Because you've got all the time in the world to kind of play with that, and then it's like, oh, they want another of this one. So yeah, what was the big difference between the two?
It's huge. Like, and unless you're trying to simulate that situation for yourself, I don't think the reality makes sense until you're in that situation. And like when you're going on submission to publishers, they encourage stand alone with serious potential is the phrase. So you want a book that stands alone if they just want to buy one, but if there's a possibility to make it a series, then you've built in that potential. Yeah.
More books.
Yeah. So you've got more books. But since that first book might not sell, it doesn't make sense to plan or to write more books that won't sell either. Right. You're better off making the next different thing to go on if this one has to go in the trunk. So, but no one thinks about like if you do get that standalone with serious potential deal, then suddenly the clock is ticking and you have to plan and produce the rest of the series under all that pressure. So that was definitely a huge learning curve.
And did you just start watching episodes of Firefly over and over?
It was like there was no... Until right now, actually, with the final book is in copy edits, which means that I can't touch it anymore for another few weeks.
Is that freeing, or is that
until then? It's freeing, but it's also really weird. So, like for the past 2 to 3 years, I've not had a break because if one book is off of my plate, I have to be working on the next one because I need the time to be planning and like plotting and writing and revising. Like, so there was never a moment where I was not working on this series because the time crunch was too much, especially with like a crazy full-time job. So until right now, I have like not been out of that world.
When did Right Now start?
I think it's been a week or two.
Okay.
Yeah, right at the beginning of October, I turned in my line edits to go to the next phase.
I need to know, are you just like, oh, look, the world? Are you just gobbling all the things that you couldn't do? Are you just taking this huge relaxing break? What is
That was
it
my
looking like?
plan. That was my plan.
I'm going to
But
rest.
I'm still, yeah, my day job is piled on to fill up all of that extra time. So I don't have a break to sort of integrate the whole past couple years. So I'm like, I'm still working, but also there's a strange void of like not working on the trilogy.
Have you? No, I want to save that for the end, but I've already gone this way. So, have you settled on something next, or are you taking a deep breath before you make any decisions on whether or not there may be something next?
Yeah, it might be a little bit of both. I have decided on what I want to pitch next. I don't know, like if I'm allowed to talk about it or not, but anyway, it'll be another book in the same universe is what I
Okay.
would like to write
Okay.
next. Set like 30 or something years after the trilogy ends.
Okay.
So it'll be a standalone, but people can enter with a trilogy or enter in that book, and then if they like it, pick up the trilogy. So it'll be
Will
a
it be a
little
standalone with series potential?
no, no, I'm too burned out. Yeah, I know a
Excuse me.
lot of authors, like for that reason of how intense trying to like lay the track down as you're going when you get a series deal. I think a lot of authors burn out on their first trilogy or more books because you don't realize how intense it's going to be. And, depending what kind of other work you have or support you have in your life or not, I think a lot of authors burn out. And then it's like you kind of need these little bite-sized standalones to kind of build yourself back up to wanting to do this huge thing. Although if I did another series, I would know to plan it out completely ahead of time. Like if I was sure that I would be getting that series deal, I would do the work before it was crunch time.
So, what is it for you that recharges your batteries? You're a very sensory person, and that comes out in your writing. What is the thing that gives you joy and kind of makes it easier for you to go back to write again?
Yeah, I think day to day, a lot of it is having enough time to sort of shut down and go into like low stimulation mode. Especially because I have synesthesia and hypersensitivities that make just like existing really um, uh, imposing, I'll say. So to be able,
Can we talk about that for a second? Because my understanding of is it synesthete?
yeah, synesthesia, and I'm a synesthete.
And I've heard it described as like, kind of hearing colors and tasting shapes and that kind of thing, where it's all kind of blended together. Is that even vaguely correct?
Yeah, it's a cross wiring of senses in the brain,
Yeah.
but which ones are cross wiring with what is there's like all kinds of possibilities, and everyone's really individual in which one they have and like how they experience it. And mine's pretty rare. It's um, auditory tactile, so sounds in my environment I feel in my body, um, like internally and on my skin, and I sort of have a mental, like everything has a texture and a shape to it and emotion to it. And my brain also tries to map my proprioception, like my sense of where I am in space and time, to things like sound, sonic things going on in my environment. So it's like really, it's constantly overwhelming. Um,
And
in
phenomenal.
addition, yeah, in addition to just being extra sensitive to um, all kinds of all senses, pretty much. so, so yeah, to recharge, having like a space that's quiet and calm, or being able to otherwise kind of shut down. And sometimes that's like just putting on headphones and looping the same song for all day or something, and like focusing on, like sometimes it doesn't mean sensory deprivation. It just means being able to kind of somehow block out everything else and like get back on track from feeling scattered by the way I experience my environment.
Some of the animators I work with use brown noise while they work. Do those two things go together for you at all? Because you can't really have anything else going while you're working.
Yeah. No, when I'm working, I need my ears, which makes it hard to balance those two. Yeah, especially now that I'm working from home mostly. I'm not in like a little studio. I'm not in my design suite at Skywalker, so it's not like a soundproof room where by nature it sort of insulates me so that I can work and I'm only hearing the sounds that I'm working on. So that's been really difficult to try and manage my environment and how overloaded I am while also still performing at work, hearing things. Yeah. But the other side of recharging is getting out in nature to me, like going for a hike or going to the beach or, kind of getting away from getting away from crowds and from people and from that activity and that sort of buzz. And there's something soothing about the rhythms and scents and that sensory experience out. Like if I can get way out, like I'll go up on the ridge or out to the beach, into the beach or something. Just sort of being in that feels recharging, all those natural rhythms. And especially because I spent so much of my life like out in the wilderness and really living in rural places. I think it's like built into my cells that means everything is okay.
Yeah, feels like home.
Yeah, it's safe.
I love that. The Alastair Reynolds blurb of Nophek Gloss was as follows: an intricate, vivid, and psychedelic cosmos. Which one of those words stands out to you as being most true?
I mean, one thing that's fascinating is how different readers describe my work, right? Because it's individual to them what words they pick and how, like, what stands out to them.
Because it's not just the diversity, it's a lot of different things.
Yeah. So it's always cool to see how, like, what stands out to that individual person. I would think intricate is probably, to me, sounds the most accurate out of those. But maybe that's also because I had to work on I had to craft those intricacies and they've been in my head for so long that those are where my biggest problems are as well.
How long did it take you from the time that you knew there was going to be a second book to producing the second book?
Let's see. So I got the deal in like December 2019. And by that summer, I want to say, sort of like spring, summer 2020, which is a great time. No other stress whatsoever. Yeah, by sort of mid 2020, I was like plotting and starting to draft. But you ping pong back and forth. So like there are phases where my book will be with my editor and I can't work on it, or it'll be copy edits or some other phase. So then I would go back to like whatever the next book was. So there's a phase where you're back and forth, which can be kind of it can be hard on your brain switching those gears back and forth. And even like when Nophek Gloss came out, I was already elbows deep in the second book. So like my brain is intensely in that mode. But then I'm doing interviews and podcasts and talk and all the media and like everyone's talking about the first book. So you're always constantly kind of pulled by this tide of like something that you've in a way moved on from.
Absolutely.
And like the excitement too of like finishing it and like all these kind of you've emotionally moved on from a lot of the like completion feeling of the previous book when readers are getting it in their hands and they're excited. And so there's another surge of excitement, but you're already somewhere else. So yeah, that was an interesting thing that I hadn't I hadn't thought of and no one had talked about. So I was like, this is weird. This is a weird whiplash. Not bad, but just if you're not expecting it to kind of get pulled back and forth between these different points in time.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you really didn't have a chance to just bury in because you're pushing and kind of having to do the marketing while you're also being creative. It's a left brain, right brain a little bit, but oof.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot at the same time. Was that like a steep learning curve? Because I imagine they don't screw around when it comes to the PR. It's like this one, this one, this one, this one, let's go.
Yeah, and I said yes to everything, which if I could have talked to my past self, I would say don't don't overload yourself saying yes to everything. And I think a lot of people suspected that, like, with sorts of big films that I've worked on, that I would be used to like the media stuff and doing promotional events and doing talks and interviews and all this. But before the first book came out, I had like in the first month, I had done more media stuff than like in the entirety of the rest of my life.
Right.
Like it was a lot, and so it was a learning curve to trying to figure out what works for me doing those, and like how, because I'm not naturally someone who is comfortable being interviewed or on camera or audio or any of that.
Right.
So, or like answering questions on the fly and trying to keep up processing at the speed the conversation's going. So it was a lot of like, all right, these are a bunch of skills that I have to learn and sort of R&D, what's going to work for me, which is not creative authorly stuff, right? It's not a whole other brain.
Right.
It's like, all right, this is a part of who I have to be now. So let's learn these things.
It seems to me like you could learn anything that you set your mind to. You have this feel about you that's this kind of confidence and sense of accomplishment that just goes hand in hand with who you are. I just admire you and look up to you in terms of what you've accomplished and what you've done. And to get off of me for a second, Bo was interested in knowing out of what you read the past year, name your top 3 to 5 books.
Oh gosh. So the other thing that happens is
ranking things. That's hard.
Yeah. But also like my reading time has dried up so much, which is another thing that I hadn't expected. I mean, it makes sense. Yeah, like two jobs and all of, so like the books that I read, I don't know if I've even read 3 or 5 books this year. I've been so busy. And a lot of things like I beta read for friends to swap to get like critique on my own work, or I'll read books that aren't out yet, or that I can't talk about yet. So there's like, I will say The Justice of Kings was one of the books I read early this year, and it's one of my favorites. And that's by Richard Swan. And The Surviving Sky by Krithika H. Rao is coming out next year from Titan Books. So that's like I'm yearning for more science fantasy, like, and stuff in that crossover zone. Right. So that's definitely a science fantasy book with like architects and engineering and science type stuff, but also like plant magic and like consciousness dimensions and like all this other stuff that I really love. So that was another standout this year.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, I haven't read, like, my TBR is just insane.
Does anybody have a TBR that's not insane? I mean,
yeah. Well, and the thing that gets me is like it's insane, but then I feel bad because there's like things I'm excited about and they just keep getting pushed, and I'm excited about this, and then like I have to try and get back to the excitement of all these little moments I've missed in my life.
Right. I remember that moment of walking into the library as a kid and looking around and coming to the sad realization that I couldn't read all of them in my entire life. And it was just like this sense of disappointment that I can't get to them all.
That reality hit you.
Right. And I feel like that's what my TBR is like. It's just, I've got 25 books minimum that are on the TBR right now. And I know that another 3 are going to get added before Christmas.
Yeah. Well, my goal, like finish the trilogy and then do nothing for like 3 months or something, and like just catch up on all of the media, like the TV, the movies, the books, the video games that I missed for the past like 3 years. It hasn't happened yet, but yeah, I just gonna binge and get myself caught up. So we'll see if that happens. But that was my goal.
Speaking of, that reminds me, I wanted to ask you, when you write about food, it's almost like the food is a character. It's like built into the story. Can you talk about either your relationship with food or why you write about food the way that you do? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I can't really put I love food and cooking, but I don't have a whole lot of time for it. So maybe partly like, again, the past few years of like crazy book and life stuff and burnout is like my creative mind is wanting that kind of nourishment for me. So it like dives into the description an extra amount. But it's also like, I would say as a kid, I was always sort of dissecting nature and like taking apart plants and feeling textures and like being very sensory about the material world. And I think when I'm trying to describe some weird food stuff, that's definitely where my brain goes, of like using familiar things but putting them back together in different ways, or like because the food is very alien, but I think you can kind of imagine what it is by the way I describe it. So food is like, just food is so sensory in general, and multisensory, that it's a good platform for my style and the way that I think about things.
Yeah.
I actually had this won't be the book that I'm going to pitch next, but I've been dying to write like a book with a chef main character, and originally it was going to be fantasy with like bunch of weird animals and plants and stuff. But then I thought this might be cool in like the Nophek Gloss multiverse, especially the way things translate between universes, and how to use that culinarily. So we'll see. Maybe in the future there'll be like a chef book in the multiverse for me.
Oh, that'd be delightful. That'd be a nice twist.
Make everyone hungry.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you had said in an interview was that you really enjoy kind of what's your favorite thing to write. And you said that the quiet moments between the action are sometimes the most satisfying, because you've got a couple of different people and you need to find their voices in the rhythm of that conversation. Is that true for you in real life? Is it satisfying to be able to artfully fill kind of an empty space with dialogue? What is the thing that draws you to that?
That's a good question. I think related to what we were talking about before, about how sort of busy and overloading a lot of the way I perceive the world is, I think, and how intensely detailed it is, that when there are those quieter, stiller moments, then the detail of specific things can kind of come out in a really beautiful way, that I just can't get when everything else is going on in some busier environment. And that's whether that's like, I'm out on a hike and I'm spotting orchids or listening to a bird, or like little things, or it could be a quiet space with someone else and you're connecting, and like the dialogue or body language, or like, it doesn't matter what those little details are, but I like the extra space and dimensions that those things can take up when you give it that, when you kind of quiet everything else down.
If that's not something that makes you want to pick up the book, I don't know what.
Yeah, I mean, there's also some cool action, but right? I love the intimate moments are my favorite.
Well, and one of the things for me is people with either a musical or oral background always find rhythm in everything if they're worth their salt. And It's layered into your writing and into the dialogue where it feels, it's got a nice cadence to it. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that's definitely and there's a lot of crossover between like the sort of work I do with sound and my writing that like I hadn't really thought about until people started pointing it out. And like that makes absolute sense. Because I'm absolutely working with um, the rhythm of different beats, the connection between them,
Yeah.
where the silence is, and that sort of flow and musicality to the sound and the sonic storytelling when I'm cutting a scene for film. And I don't actively think that way when I'm writing, but I think that's definitely like those are the same gears going on. Yeah. Um, to produce that sort of same feeling that I'm so used to working with in film.
That drum beat is there in the back of your head.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much. And Azura Ghost is up for a SFF Oasis award. So, we want you to go into the Oasis and stuff the ballot boxes.
And yeah,
For,
thank you for inviting me, and thank you for everyone who read. Like that, a second book would be a finalist is amazing to you.
oh, you're well loved. Oh, and I just also need to say that Essa has the favorite quote of all time. And do you remember what that one is?
I think it was like every month is NaNoWriMo if you're when you're on deadline. I think I've been doing NaNoWriMo for like 24 months or more.
Right? It's just like I'm on it
That's what
all
it
the
feels like,
time.
yeah.
It's like you amateurs don't even know. I am on the grind all the time. All right. Are you ready for 2 minutes with Essa Hansen? Are you ready to go?
All right, do my best.
Deep breath. And here we go. What is the worst haircut you have ever had?
Oh, so my hair's always like 2, 3 feet long. I tried it short once, and with the weight off, all of my like curls and waves came up, and it was not manageable at all. Yeah.
Have you ever been told you look like someone famous? And if so, who?
Uh no. I don't think
Very
people
good.
can place me very easily.
If you had your own late night talk show, who is the first person you would have on as your guest?
Uh that's tough. My brain immediately went to Alistair Reynolds because that was the first talk that I had about the book was a discussion with him, and it was so lovely. That yeah, I'll go back there.
That's perfect. Quid pro quo. If you could describe one perfect reader for your work, who would they be?
Going by the readers that have connected with it, I think anyone who understands trauma or PTSD or living on with hurt is really connected with these characters. And also, anyone who's sort of a misfit in any way will connect with the found family and finding your place in the story.
Absolutely. If you had to sing karaoke, what is the one song you would pick?
Uh, I don't know.
Good enough.
I've never sang karaoke, but maybe one day.
What is the worst job you've ever had?
The worst job. Hang.
Hang?
Anyone who's a farmer will understand.
Hay, like HAYING, doing hay?
Yeah.
That sounds terrible. You can't even pronounce it.
Yeah.
Another question. What can unite all human beings?
Oh, understanding, communication.
Oh, and we're out of
Oh,
time.
you actually had a timer.
I appreciate you.
Oh.